Hello there, welcome back to another show. Today, I'll get these up from here. Today, I am going to be talking about a variety of films, two of which are actually in the cinema just now. Some of which are now put Alan Clarke double bill. We have a What the Hell Is This? And I have a look at a fairly late Eva John Huston film, but from like 1970. So I'm going to start the Alan Clarke double bill like I did last week. So again, it's from the Alan Clarke set, BFI. It's a terrific set. Put it down here, and it's I'm trying to Bukovsky and Nina. So both of these are very much alike. One's a documentary, one's a fiction, but the fictional story is written by Jahane Markham, who's a poet whose father was included in the documentary because it was all of it was about what he was doing to get Russian people out of Russia who were state criminals. So they are very much linked. So Alan Clarke was tied to the Tibetan documentary, and then because he knew Jahane Markham, he got her to write a story about one of the immigrants to and how they could cope in Britain. Now these are two excellent not documentaries. One's documentary, one's drama, but they're both like based on reality, and they're both wonderful. So the best way to talk about them is just talk about the documentary first, then the fiction, because that's the order they were made. And one was for BBC. The Nina was for BBC because Alan Clarke was a well-known director there. He made Bukowski using favours. Did not. It was never shown on the BBC. He was hoping the BBC would show it, but they never did. He tried to show it around different places to get people interested, but never, unless you knew the end of the subject, you would never see it. It was thought lost for a long time. They found the footage of the actual visuals, then not long before they actually put this Blu-ray out, they found the sound as well. One of Clark's old friends had it somewhere. So they managed to sync up the sound and the visuals. So on the BFI box set, it was the first time anyone had seen this since the late 1970s. It was not a well-known documentary. It's one of those lost films that actually were found. And it is excellent. I mean, the subject, Bukovsky, became controversial later because he went more right-wing after this. He was coming out of a Soviet communist disastrous situation, and he was very much, when he came out, he was very much hopeful for the future. That hope faded pretty quick when he realised just how limited Britain was and how Britain had his own problems. They didn't really care that much. I mean, the only people he saw who really cared were the ones who got him out, or helped get him out. The rest of the country couldn't care less. Which is what happens in any kind of democracy. It's like you might get 5 minutes of attention sometimes, and you might get a bit of support, but most people will not support you full long term. It's too much effort for most people. Most people are lazy. They don't care. They just want to be there when something happens so they can get their face in the news, and then they move on. This happens now as well. I mean, if you look at the outcry about Palestine about a year ago, and then where did all that interest go about the rights of the Palestinians? It went nowhere because people forgot after the first flux of interest. The only reason that the Ukraine war actually gets any attention is because the media wants to get attention because they've got their own vested interest. Something like Yemen gets completely ignored. But because Ukraine is much more important to the people in charge, it gets a lot of support in the media. So it just depends where you are. So the Russians who came over here expected a lot more done from our government, and that did not happen. Now, Bukovsky became controversial later on as well for other reasons. He was an opponent of Putin. He did not like Putin, but he also had not long before he died, they tried to arrest him on child porn charges. So there was a darker side to him that I'm not going to go into that. It's nothing to do with what this is, because he's a subject of it, but he's not really. You only see a little bit of him in this film. You see him for one interview when he's just been released, and that's about it. So it's not really about him and his life. It's about what these people meant to Britain and how Britain didn't really give a damn about them, and how they've kind of relied on people actually putting up their time and effort to try and get them released, how much effort that took and how many years that took. Because this took 10 years to get them out. And at the time in Russia, the big thing they did was if they had a political dispute with somebody, if someone was saying communism is bad, it's a bad system, it's not a very good way to succeed, they were declared mad and sent to insane asylums. And their dissident political view was viewed as the rantings of an insane person, which is what every government would love to do. If they had the power, if they had the ability to do that, they would do that to anybody who criticised them. In the West, we can't do that. That's viewed as a violation of human rights. Rightly so. I mean, it is a violation of human rights. But that's a new concept. And a lot of countries who have an old-fashioned concept of rulership and knowing your place, that kind of human rights is a bit fancy and not really very popular, so they never follow that. I'm not going to do that. That's not really what we're into. So, in Russia, you call married, you put in a insane asylum, and you'd be left there to rot. Every so often, if you're well enough known and there's enough protests about you, you would maybe get released eventually out of the insane asylum, but still have to deal with the KGB watching you all the time and all the kind of suggestions that you're an enemy of the state. So it was no picnic to be in Russia for Glasnost and actually say the communist system is wrong. So the film looks into that. It covers this idea of how a lot of people in Russia didn't believe this could possibly be going on, because why would you do that? Communism was meant to be there on their side. And it was just that's the first sign of, to some people, the rot setting in. To a lot of people already knew that all about the death camps and all the millions of people dead. And the whole idea of communism, to actually make it work, you need to figure out all your enemies who would fight against it. Which is a lot of people, because communism was never the most popular idea in the first place. And if you know anything about Russian history, you know it got in because of, it just took over the resistance to the Tsar, because the Tsar made so many mistakes and he was so incompetent that there was going to be an uprising. And there were a lot of Russians who wanted a more sane uprising that was a bit more democratic, and the communists managed to steamroll through and pervert what should have been a much more sane, democratic system, which is what happens in a lot of countries. I mean, communism has a tendency to take over like democratic urges towards a more safer system rather than a crazy right-wing, military-backed dictatorship. It tends to go for communism and dictatorship rather than what most people want, which is someone in the middle where it's like the people who can vote and you vote in your leaders and it's a normal democracy. That's generally what people would rather have. But a lot of countries that in the 20th century and even now in the 21st century, there's a more extreme versions of that. But it's mainly a 20th century thing. So a lot of people in this system really despised communism, but they couldn't say anything because everyone's watched everyone else. They created a system of people being paranoid. And the way to get up in a system was to rat in your friends, rat in your neighbours, say they're not a real communist. That was a better way to do it for a lot of people rather than actually prove yourself to be good at a job. And that's why communism began to rot, because a lot of the people promoted or upholding communism were not the geniuses. All the geniuses were already dead or sent to Siberia to die. And, So the film looks at that element, but also looks at, it's explained a lot through Bukovsky on his interview stuff. He's talking about his hopes for the future and the dangers of talking freely at all. Because whenever you talk to anybody, you had to wonder, are they like me or are they actually an enemy, but they're trying to put on a good face and probably stabbing you back later on. So there's that element which comes across and has been condemned publicly through the film. But also the film shows that the embassy would not accept anything that was a kind of protest from Britain or from British citizens, because if anyone did that, they would be seen as weak on communism and their careers would be over. The film also looks at that thing as no one really cared. No one cared about this guy being rotten or all these people were rotten. And it took a lot of effort to actually get anyone out. And it was really difficult because at that point, communism wanted to prove that it was an efficient service and there was very few distance, and the distance that were there were insane. So it took a lot. It took a lot of work to get the psychiatric field to actually condemn what was obviously a profession of psychiatry and have them to the guts to actually say this is wrong, this is immoral. So it looks at what the systematic abuses go on, both in Russia but also in America and Britain, where people just don't have the guts to really stand up for what's going on. So the film kind of covers that. It covers the family, David Markham and his daughters, as they're the ones who are protesting a lot about this and trying to join organizations, and they're trying to get them out, trying to get other people out as well. And you get different people who were in the communist Russia who got out, and they're talking about the various flaws within the system and the variety of dangers of the system. So it was a film about the danger of communism and the damage it does to human beings and why it's not a good system, which would have been way more popular in the 80s than it was in the 70s. The 70s was more left-wingish, and that was criticising left-wing. And as you probably know, if you criticise something, the side that comes on, if they're in power, they would not want to know, because it is criticising their side. Even if it's something they don't agree with themselves, it's still seen as something that's criticising them indirectly. So this film had not a chance in hell, because it was been critical of a lot of stuff about the things that the Labour government would just let pass because they were left-wing and the communists are left-wing, and let's not rock any boats and all that stuff, even though they knew communism was insane. So that's Bukovsky. It's very good. I'd highly recommend it. If you've got the Alan Clarke box set, I don't think you can get it another way, because it's such an obscure documentary. It's just one of those ones you have to pay attention to just buy the box set to see it. There are some good extras on it, the outtakes, there's commentaries, talking about more about the behind the scenes production. And everyone was basically doing it as a favour. No one was getting paid, because Clarke was actually paying for himself, and he could only afford so much, and people just did it as a favour because they wanted about Alan Clarke and they agreed with the message of it. Nina was actually a paid production by the BBC. It was written, like, Alan Clarke obviously knew a lot of producers, and he was known for this Play for the Days and how strong they were. So he managed to get this pushed through. He got Jane Markham, who was a daughter of David Markham, to write it, because she knew a lot of the ex-communist, or the people who came from communist Russia who escaped and whose eyes had been opened by what was actually going on in Russia. So she had the background, even though she didn't really want to write it, she actually knew everything and knew all the people, so she could actually do a more objective job than most, because she could see the problems these people were having in their lives as they come over, which is really what the film's about, and how some succeeded and how some failed. They transfer over from a very extreme authoritarian culture to something that's very democratic, and some people could survive that and some people couldn't. So that's really what it was about. It was about how the sacrifices needed to be made to come over, and then also where those sacrifices lead. So it was beyond the basic idea of what was the political point. So what happened to the people after this? So Nina is basically a doctor who realizes she works in psychiatry offices, and she realizes it's getting perverted. So she's played by Eleanor Braun in a terrific performance, and she falls in love with a dissident who was under the care of her hospital for a bit before managing to get out, and eventually managed to go to the West. And he asks her and he gets her to come along later. So she defects later with him, and she begins to realize how difficult it is in the West because she leaves her son behind and spends a lot of time trying to get him back out. And the film never tells you whether she does or not. But what's good is based on reality, and it's based on a doctor who had to relearn a lot of skills in Britain again and learn English to actually, and then went on to be a doctor in Britain. And she got her son out, but it took a long time. So it's based on reality, but it's still fiction. So the person she came over for, who's in love with, is this dissident who's meant to be writing a book, but he never can quite get to it. He was very focused when he was in Russia, but what the problems were. He was very focused about not giving in to the pressure to be a strong fighter. But as soon as he comes over here to Britain, some of that discipline goes, and there's a sense of he's a damaged person from all the struggle he's had, and he can't quite face it. He can go to talk to people, but he finds a lot of them are just middle class people who don't care that much. They want to be seen to be caring. They want you in your little group to show how much they do stuff, but they're not really going to help you that much. So he has to do a lot of that, and he gets fed up with that. He can't write the book. He keeps on putting excuses not to write the book, to just get up and do the damn thing. He just puts excuse after excuse. He starts drinking a lot more, has some friends. He becomes just a person who's not good to have around. And it's a slow disintegration of this person. While Nina watches, she's always going to the marches to try and get her son back. She's always trying to help out all the people who are trying to do the struggle. She knows that they're dealing with a lot of people in the West who are probably not as genuine as they'd wished for. It's not an ideal situation. But she can handle it a lot better. She's more mature than the other guy, the guy she's with. And you basically see the relationship disintegrate between them. And you get a sense of the differences as well as where her strength is and where his weakness is, and how he's just dragging her down. He becomes jealous. He becomes possessive because she's the only thing he's got. But by being so disorganized and letting people down and using people, he begins to disgust her. Like she thought he was a man of greater principles than what he turns out to be, or as he becomes in Britain, as he's basically been worn down, and his sense of what's possible starts to just erode when he realizes there's not going to be that much help. The best you can probably do is make out for yourself and actually do some good deeds and help out and develop a life for yourself, is what she did. You know, actually realized she has to create a life for herself here. She can still do this other stuff, but she has to actually settle down and get a life here that is solid. Well, he just keeps living in the past, and I can't quite get over what happened to him. And he's still obsessing over it, and he's still looking for a way through it, which requires a lot of people to do stuff they're not going to do. So he can't quite move on with his life. And it's just about the reality versus someone who's living still in Fantasyland and getting angry about it. And just two approaches to survive in a very difficult situation, a very traumatic situation. One survives, another one just flails around. It's a wonderful film. It really is well acted. It's paced really well because they take out a lot of the boring stuff that you'd have in other films. Like they expect you, if it's a time jump, for you to place the stuff together to what's happening in between. and they require intelligence as an audience member to put together what's happened, which is really refreshing because it keeps you on your toes and keeps you focused. And the whole thing is really about this pressure cooker, this couple who things happen around them, but it's really about their disintegration as a couple and the effects they passed on them and how one survived and how one doesn't. And that's it, really. It's a simple story, but you get a lot about the Russian immigration experience, the Russian trying to deal with democracy where it's not the ideal that they probably hope for when they're going through difficulties in Russia. It's something else. And it's something much more self-involved, narcissistic, and less kind than they hoped for. So it's a realistic look at what actually happens during an idealistic, situation where reality is always hovering above it, and where idealism can't really win, practicality has to kind of win, and there's not going to be an easy solution. It's going to be a very imperfect solution, and it's like, do you go along with that or do you not? So these are two great films. I'd highly recommend seeing both of them. Oops, and I need to do this. I prefer Nina, but Bukovsky actually gives you a lot more context. But Nina's much stronger because it's a drama and it's about people. You get a lot of what's going on with them just through the drama. So, yep, it's a wonderful double bill. I would recommend you try and get it. If you've got the box set, watch it. They're really good. So that's me for now on this one. I'll be back soon with some more. Bye.